Nick, if you want to go ahead and hit record. Great. Hi, friends, and welcome to our second Young Adult Advocacy training. If you missed week 1 or you would like to see graphics from last week with Roslyn, you can check out our Instagram account or our Facebook page. In addition, if you want to know more about Bon Secours Young Adults, you can find more information there as well, or see upcoming events that we have going on. After our guest speaker shares this evening, she'll be answering questions. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, you're welcome to put them into the chat bar, or you can send them in a private message to myself. My name is Lauren DeSmit. And then just as a reminder, as we go into tonight, we're really, really grateful that you're here. Thank you for taking the time to learn and pray and grow with us together. So we ask that you enter into this safe space with compassion and respect for one another, but also we really hope that you bring your frustrations and your doubts and your joys and your passions to this table. We really hope that we can leave this time together with a greater sense of being good help in the world, which that's what Bon Secours means in French, is good help. So that is our hope for the time. We are going to start tonight with a quote. We're going to pray this quote together that Anna sent us. She'll be referencing it later on in her talk. But I'm going to invite everyone to bow their head in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks, compassion on the world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands, yours are the feet, yours are the eyes, yours are his body. Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks, compassion on the world. Christ has no body now on earth but yours. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Our speaker this evening is Anna Johnson, the team leader for the Maryknoll Young Adult Empowerment Team. Anna is based out of Seattle, Washington, and has backgrounds in peace studies, political science, nonviolent teaching, social justice, and lived faith. She's a dear friend, and I'm so thankful that she's here sharing her wisdom with all of us tonight. So while we're all on mute, please give Anna a round of applause as I symbolically hand the microphone over to Anna.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Okay. I had a couple of audio issues there for a second, but I'm glad that we're back. So first of all, I just want to say I'm so honored to be included in this conversation series. I think this is an amazing conversation series, and looking at the other people who are a part of it they're all my heroes. So I feel really humbled to be a part of this panel. So I'm excited to be here with you tonight. And talking about ways to be Catholic and politically active. It is certainly a relevant topic right now, and I'm excited that you're all here to talk about it with us and to dive into it. I want to start by being completely transparent. Most of the time when entering into the political realm, there's this part of me that really just wants the Saul to Paul experience. Like, the other person is clearly doing the wrong thing. Just upon encountering me, and all I have to do is say their name and ask them a question, all of a sudden sees that my way is clearly the right way, falls off his horse or whatever the modern day equivalent is, and eventually his eyes are reopened to an entirely different way of life. It's great. Nobody gets seriously hurt. Everyone's better off for it. There's some skills that are involved. It's weird. Conversion happens. Honestly, without me having to say too much, it seems great. But when it comes down to it, I'm not Jesus, and I can't get people to change in this way. And let's face it, it's also not often the way that Jesus does things. So I probably should not count on that happening. So what does Jesus do? How can we be politically active in his witness? Do we have any examples from him? So we know that Jesus spoke to the Pharisees and the scribes, the people who let us know about the law, who interpreted the law, who wrote some of the law. So, yeah, I should probably also partake in advocacy to and with elected officials through making letters, calls, and visits. Um, Next screen, please, and is a picture of us doing advocacy day, Catholic Advocacy Day in the capital of Washington State, where I'm based. Um, so a bunch of Catholics all go to the Capitol and meet with our legislators. I love the way Pope Francis talks about this sometimes. He says, a good Catholic meddles in politics, offering the best of himself or herself, so that those who govern can govern. Jesus' witness also, as you'll see in the next picture, gathers crowds, which was probably powerful to be a part of. This image is from El Salvador. And likely it also made the local leaders pause and take notice because the crowds were pretty big. They would wonder, who is this speaking? What is he saying? What should we be paying attention to? And so we're also called to hit the streets in today's world. As you'll see in the next picture, it's a picture of a Black Lives Matter movement that's here in Seattle, Washington. We have a gospel tradition of rallies, of gathering together in the streets and in public spaces to speak about the common good and to work to create a better world. The next picture is a story that I think a lot of us are familiar and friendly with. The advocacy of economics. It's another area that we can be politically active. How do we spend our money? How do we engage with the political through the economic realm? And you'll know that when Jesus flipped the tables of the vendors in the temple, he didn't just not purchase from those people. He flipped their table. So I'm not saying to flip anyone's table, but we are invited sometimes to take outright and strong action in these situations when they've been engaged in. So we think about who are we shopping from? How am I spending my money? Or as a lot of people in this realm like to say, how am I voting with my dollars? Thinking about the people who make our clothes, the people who harvest our food, and who are engaged with all that we are putting into and on our bodies and around our lives. And then we also have, from our gospel tradition, the advocacy of one-on-one conversations, these tough political conversations that are hard to have. In the gospel story of when Jesus met this tax collector who was taking a bunch from the people of his community, which was the way that tax collectors acted in those days. He met this man named Zacchaeus who was up in a tree trying just to get a glimpse at Jesus. And Jesus, rather than chastising him or anything else, looked up in the tree and says, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house for dinner. He invites himself over to his house, and he went into his house. And to quote Hamilton, no one was in the room where it happened, but Zacchaeus came out a completely different person. He was a different tax collector, a different community member, and he lived his life in a totally different way. So we are also called to have these one-on-one conversations and engage that way. I could go on and on with all these gospel traditions, but I think you get it. Jesus did all of this. Jesus was absolutely politically active in his day, and so we're invited to do the same in his model and his witness. So we know that many of the different forms of political advocacy have their history in our Gospels, actually going back further than that throughout the Old Testament. So what if we switch now and say, how do we look going forward? What is Jesus calling us to now, here, and today? On the next slide, you'll see in this time, there's a lot of big political situations going on and conversations that I have felt called to have with myself, with legislators, and also with family members and friends that I've been praying about. And a lot of these honestly feel like the Saul to Paul route would be so much easier. In the past 2 months alone, we have been in a global pandemic. We've had major protests in the streets for Black Lives Matter. We've had huge Supreme Court decisions, lots happening around immigration. Ice caps are melting, new changes in what's happening with the stay-at-home orders. And oh yeah, we have a presidential election coming up in less than 100 days. So this certainly is a time when we've got a lot going on. And the good news is we've got a faith that helps us figure out how to think about these issues. And so we have to get involved. And I think particularly that Teresa of Avila quote, is so powerful around this. Christ has no body now but yours, but mine, but ours. This is how we're called to be. We're called to be acting as Christ would be on the earth today, right? Our feet taking us to the places that Christ would go. Our hands writing the letters and making the calls and getting involved in the work that Jesus would. So this is an essential part, and this is a good poem that honestly I have pasted up above my desk in my office, because sometimes it can get a little intimidating to get involved in this work, of this advocacy work, and it can get a little exhausting too. But it's a good reminder for me that it's Christ's work as I engage with it. And so to keep thinking about this evening with this question that I think is often asked in some of the Catholic places and groups in which I find myself, this question of should we as Catholics be engaging in political conversation, I will say that if we see ourselves as trying to live out Christ's mission and message on earth, then how could we not? Pope Francis agrees. Given today's, what he likes to call throwaway culture, and so many problems unfolding in the world, he says, do I as a Catholic watch from my balcony? No, you can't watch from your balcony. Get right in there. This doesn't mean that we should align ourselves with one party or the other. Jesus didn't really fit into any one political party back then, if that was a thing, or now. He was Jewish, yes, but he also challenged the followers of the faith to follow God more closely. He was of a particular socioeconomic status, absolutely, but he didn't let that dictate who he met, who he hung out with, or what he thought. He was a particular race and ethnicity, but he didn't let that keep him from working to understand the realities that people of other races and ethnicities lived and responding to those. He was of a particular immigration history, a gender, a family situation, a profession, a reality, and rather than let any of that define him into one way of thinking, he lived beyond labels. And his preaching and witnessing were ways that made people uncomfortable because he didn't fit into one box. So yeah, there is no Catholic political party. That means we've got to get involved in the messiness of it and try and discern where God is calling us towards. Now, some of you might be saying to yourself, Anna, well, that's all well and good, but how many of us, and you can throw your hand up in the bar, the reactions bar, if you're feeling courageous, how many of us have been put into black and white boxes because we've called ourselves Catholic? How many times have we feared to call ourselves Catholic in some groups because we fear that we'll be put into a box about what we believe? How many of us have been told, I know exactly how you think because you're Catholic? I know I have. But if we know anything about our faith, we know that we're called to a much greater complexity than black and white thinking. Our faith has a ton of resources and witnesses that we can turn to an example for this. Thank goodness. According to the great source of Wikipedia, also backed up by Pew Research, don't worry, 30.5% of Congress is Catholic, and that's split across the two parties. Maybe many of you knew that, since Bon Secours is so much closer to DC than I am in Seattle, but I had to look it up. Across 141 representatives and 22 senators, there are 99 Democrats and 64 Republicans who identify as Catholic. We've had two vice presidents who identify somehow as Catholic, Joe Biden and Mike Pence, who identifies as an evangelical Catholic. In the White House, Catholics have included John Kennedy and Melania Trump. And in pop culture, of course, we've also had Jed Bartlett, who shares my alma mater. If there's anything to learn from this, it's that Catholics don't have a certain political party. So we have these two main questions we're going to explore this evening. How do we discern our values and what should be guiding the way as we think about these current issues? And how do we engage in the process? So what I would like to have you do now is take a moment and pray about this question. I think it's worthwhile to pray about it because we want to make sure that Christ is the one asking us to engage in this particular arena of politics. And two, because I know that I need to check myself in the political realm. I get involved, emotions and tensions are high, and I can get carried away. I know I don't have all the knowledge and experience that the world possesses, clearly. And so I need to make sure that I continue to stay open to the wisdom of the Spirit and not get too entrenched in my own ego. So I'm going to be silent for a whole minute, and I invite you to even write down this question to Jesus. Really enter into prayer about this and see if he helps guide your answer. What is one political issue that you'd like to think about, discern about, hold, process about tonight in light of our faith? Thank you for doing that. So now I'll invite you to keep this issue, this topic in mind as we move through these tools of thinking about politics that are given to us by our church. We have an incredible wealth of thought, wisdom, and tools that can help inform us as we move towards action. We have Jesus' witness. We've got doctors of the church. We've got a history of popes and Catholic teaching. We've had our local current and historical faith leaders, as well as friends that are in the faith with us as we decide through these things together. And lucky for us, we have this incredible thing called Catholic social teaching, which is literally built to help us discern how we should stand on current issues and what's going on in our current social, cultural realities. Archbishop Laurie of Baltimore said in a recent article that he just published, he said, Catholic social teaching is not an addendum to the gospel, but a living part of the church's proclamation of our salvation in Christ Jesus. It is because of God's love for each person and for the entire human family that the church speaks about matters. And so you'll see on your screen, these are some of the main Catholic social teaching tenets. If you ever want to learn more about them, Catholic Relief Services has an incredible series that talk about them with preeminent modern voices of faith. But what we're going to do right now is dive in a little bit deeper into that particular issue that you were thinking about, into each area of this Catholic social teaching. See if it can bring some light to the discernment that you go through. So we start with life and dignity of the human person. If you can go to the next slide, please. And on that, we know that each person is born innately with being a child of God and has innate dignity just by being a person. It's not because of anything that they do, right? And so a question for reflection, a couple questions. Where in the conversation about this issue do I see human dignity and life being lifted up and supported? Do I see it being denied? Where and how am I lifting up the dignity of the people who are most affected? I'll give you a brief moment for each of them, but not too long. The next one is the option for the poor and vulnerable. This, I think a lot of Catholic social teaching, a lot of the church is pretty countercultural. This is one of the most countercultural teachings I think that we've got in our society today. This means that the people who are most impacted by our decisions should have a seat at the decision-making table. The people who are most on our margins, who are most hurt by the way that our society currently operates, should have a seat at the table. This means I can own. I should consider that most on my margins is sitting at the table with me. And so here are some good questions to think about that. How does this issue impact communities and people who are poor and marginalized by our society? Have I listened to these people to help inform my thoughts about it? The next one we'll talk about is care for God's creation. Popes Benedict XVI and Francis have both spoken often and strongly on it, as is one that is very much impacting so much of our world and our lives right now. And that's the broader right now, not just during this current pandemic, but we're seeing it as played out consistently, particularly around the world. I work with Maryknoll. We work in many countries around the world, and it's one of the biggest issues that we're seeing impacting the people we're working with on the margins. In fact, Pope Francis, in the movie that came out a few years ago, A Man of God's Word, said that the earth is the poorest of the poorest of the poor. He named that. And so thinking back to the last tenet, option for the poor and vulnerable, that the people who are poorest deserve a seat at the decision-making table, Pope Francis, by saying that, basically said that the earth, as strange as it sounds, deserves a seat at the decision-making table. That every decision we make, we should be thinking about how it impacts the earth. And he even asks in Laudato Si, he says, what need does the earth have of us? So thinking about that in this issue. Looking at solidarity and the common good. Solidarity is a word that I think is thrown around a lot, but isn't necessarily completely understood all the time. Another quote from Archbishop Laurie in this article that was about how Catholic teaching can help us engage and understand the Black Lives Matter situation. He says, authentic solidarity, however, is not noblesse oblige, which is the responsibility of privileged people to act with noble generosity towards the less privileged. Solidarity, in fact, means asking God's help in purifying our hearts of any and every notion of privilege, whether it's explicit or implied. So that's to the first question. Solidarity and common good also means lifting up the voices of the people who others are not listening to. Sometimes we hear the phrase thrown around, being a voice for the voiceless, but I would go so far as to say that no one is voiceless, right? Everyone's got a voice. Everyone's got thoughts and feelings and emotions about something. They've got a way of knowing whether they have a verbal voice or otherwise. They have opinions about things. They have understandings of the way that the world works and that their world works. And so rather, the question is, how can I be a hand clapper, so to speak? A Maryknoll priest named Jack Moynihan, he refers to himself as a hand clapper. And when I asked him what that meant, he said, well, Anna, I applaud for the people that no one else is listening to so that other people take notice and start listening. So on the issue you're thinking about, how can you be a hand clapper for those most impacted? Call to family, community, and participation. What about this issue supports family and community? What about this issue denies it? Knowing how much our church upholds the participation in community and family. The next one, rights and responsibilities. So something thinking locally and globally. Again, this is countercultural because we're called to think of all of God's creation. So what in this issue offers people access to their basic rights and ways to live out their responsibilities? And where does it deny that, both locally and globally? The dignity of work and rights of the workers. Does this issue support the dignity of work and the rights of the workers laboring, or does it diminish the rights of workers and the dignity of the job being done? And how does it do that? And the last one that's really important for us as active Catholics in politics is subsidiarity. This is the tenet that says that what is happening locally, the local experience should help dictate, should be decided by the local people rather than a bigger force. So for instance, in our Constitution already, we've got the idea of states' rights. That's living out subsidiarity. A state has the right to decide what happens within the state boundaries. And it's important for us because we need to remember that if we're living to Catholic social teaching, this means we need to vote locally as well as for the national elections. I should care as much about who's elected to my city council as I do to who's elected to the President of the United States. And so what is the situation around this issue locally? How does it impact my neighborhood, my city, my state, and how can I take action here? And so with all of these, how do we know that we're doing our best to be Christ's body for this? We align ourselves with this Catholic social teaching and pray about it, and there's also great resources like Faithful Citizenship from the USCCB. And so for that second question that I'll run through pretty quickly here, how do we engage with the political process? We do what we've done as well as pray, and then I'll offer you 3 tenets to hold in mind as you move forward. The first one, our most important commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Love every person. We're called to love our enemies and our neighbors and ourselves. And this means my neighbor that lives on this side, who I get along with really well and we see the same way. And it also means my neighbor who lives on this side, who maybe has different bumper stickers than I might have if I used bumper stickers, and might think a little differently or otherwise, as well as the people who don't live right next to me. The next one is, so that's the first one, love your neighbor as yourself. The second one is to get a little uncomfortable. This happens when we're accompanying people on our margins, right? If we're walking with people on our margins, getting to know them, having preferential option for the poor and vulnerable, then it's gonna make us a little uncomfortable because there are different ways of living, different ways of being. And so it makes us stretch a little bit. This is a picture from, I have a friend who, we differ a fair amount politically, and we decided that within that we wanted to visit each other's realities. And so I visited his hometown and where he lives on a farm, and one of the ways that I got a little uncomfortable was by mucking out horse poop out of the barn. But it also means, growing up in Portland, Oregon, this was not my experience. And so sometimes getting uncomfortable means mucking out horse poop. And sometimes it means that we have to shift to try and understand a new person's way of thinking. And sometimes it means that we're asked to speak truth to power. But we know that we're called to get uncomfortable. As Mary Nollers say, when we're called to be in mission and living God's mission, if I'm not uncomfortable, then I'm not doing it. I'm not living Jesus's mission, because it's we haven't achieved the kingdom of heaven on earth yet, right? And so we've still got work to do, and I should get a little uncomfortable as I work to build those bridges. And then the third way, so the first one, love every person. The second one, get a little uncomfortable. And the last one is find the third way. When you're given 2 choices that seem like a black and a white, or 2 hard decisions that you don't want to agree with either one of them, look for a third way and invite the other person into it. I love this scripture passage that this artist is Jesus Maffa, and he recreated a bunch of gospel stories in the African imagery. And this is the story of the stoning of the woman, where the teachers of the law and the Pharisees asked Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" And then it says they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So Jesus wasn't going to say stone the woman to death. And he also didn't want to have himself go into this trap, because that was not the reason for this question either. So what did Jesus do? He bent down, started to write in the sand, and then he asked a question. So there are a couple things that come out of this. Feel free to take the time, right? When someone asks you a question, they give you power. They give me power. When someone asks me a question, they're not going to walk away right after they've asked a question, and if I take an extra minute to respond, right? It gives us power to have a moment to catch our breath and to think, maybe there's a third way. If I'm given 2 wrong choices, there's got to be a different way to think about it. And so he was able to take a step back and interpret the question in a different way. And Jesus does this all the time in Scripture. He refuses to be cornered into black and white thinking. And I try to do this too. And it really helps to practice this at home. So when I come across a news article that makes me mad, or maybe a Facebook post or something like that, I try to sit with it in prayer and figure out what a third way might be. So how do we get involved as Catholics in political action? Think about these different ways of getting involved, like we talked about at the beginning, or other ways. There's lots on the internet. Pick one. Feel okay with getting a little uncomfortable. Get involved and see where it leads you. Maybe it's around this topic you've been discerning about tonight. Maybe it's around a different topic. Christ will be walking with each of us every step of the way, and we can always turn back to him in prayer and ask for guidance. Pope Francis has said that members of Congress have... Oh, this quote, sorry, just came in right before the call, so I just shoved it in here. I sent an email to the chaplain of the U.S. House of Representatives, who's a Catholic priest. named Father Pat Conroy. And I told him I was doing this tonight and asked him if he wanted to say anything. He taught at my high school, that's how I know him. And he said, to share with you, Pope Francis has said that members of Congress have a noble, even holy vocation because their work is dedicated to the common good and the guarantee of a fully human life for all their citizens. Legislators are elected by citizens who should be interested in those legislators engaging in policies which guarantee those things. So yes, we have an obligation to participate intelligently and morally in the political process. Then he says, an American caveat, our constitutional form of government prohibits the establishment of any religion. This protection has favored the Catholic Church. The Constitution replaced anti-Catholic laws that prevailed in 12 of the 13 colonies. Therefore, Catholics should not expect that our government would establish laws to enforce Catholic teaching. Any Catholic position, from eliminating abortion to providing for the poor and protecting immigrants, must be argued and promoted in terms of the common good. So I wanted to share that quote with you as well, because it comes straight from him. So pick one to get involved and to encourage our legislators in living out this holy vocation. And then also, because it would be irresponsible of me not to say so in an event like this, please vote. Encourage your friends and family members to vote. Help people get registered to vote. Help people have access to the polls. Vote locally as well as nationally. The opportunity to have our voice be heard, to this opportunity for participation in our rights and responsibilities, as we talked about, is an essential one. And remember to do the practice subsidiarity as well as we vote for our both national elections and our local ones. So to close, remember we don't have to be perfect in the world of politics, especially as we step in. We're going to make mistakes. We will back the wrong people at certain times in history. We will learn how, when we thought we were standing in solidarity, we were actually harming. We will make mistakes. But as Pope Francis said to students in Italy, it is hard to be in the middle of it all without getting your hands or your heart a little dirty. Ask the Lord to help you not sin, but if you get your hands dirty, ask for forgiveness and keep going. Don't get discouraged. So I invite you to continue to engage and know that there's a bunch of resources out there like the USCCB. Maryknoll has our Office for Global Concerns, which, as I said, we've got Maryknollers around the world living with people who are the poorest of the poor, and our Office of Global Concerns is in DC working with legislators to help them know about what's happening to people who are most on the margins in the world. And they have these political advocacy briefs coming out and different legislative alerts as well that you'll see. And along with the Bon Secours Young Adults, I invite you also to get to know a little bit about our Maryknoll Young Adults also. We'd love to, we partner all the time, and we'd love to have you be a part of both. So, where we talk about things like this often. So thank you very much, and I think the next thing will be questions and everything.
Just unmuting myself here. Thank you so much, Anna. That was really great. We are really, really happy that you're able to share with us tonight, and you're getting some claps there from people. But we do have a bunch of questions that have come in, and so I'm going to get us going with those. If you have other questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat to Lauren, and we will try to answer as many as we can. So Anna, you ready?
Ready.
Okay, here we go. Someone is interested in your thoughts on our political homelessness as Catholics and how we can navigate and prioritize causes when discerning voting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Such an important question for us to be thinking about, right? In terms of issues, I think it comes to us in prayer. There's the beautiful way of talking about the examination of conscience, and I noticed on the USCCB website as well, they have a great link to that. So Paul, giving you lots of shout outs over there. The idea of how do we support and form our conscience around these issues, right? So bringing them to prayer, bringing them to Catholic social teaching, bringing them to these different arenas of trying to figure out how we're called to be engaged and involved. yes, we don't have a political party. There is no Catholic political party, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be voting, right? So when I vote for a legislator, I write them a letter and I say, I take the time to say, you know what, I am voting for you because I agree with you in these ways, and I really would challenge you to be better in these ways, you know? And knowing that we're drawing the line for these legislators to know where their voters are standing, I think is really important. So it requires work. Getting involved in this is not a walk in the park, but it's so important. I think it's one of the most important things we do.
Right. Next up, question about subsidiarity. How does subsidiarity work or not work when local entities put people in danger, like in the pandemic?
Yes. So there is the reality that we have in our country elected officials that sometimes are trying their best, and there's all sorts of different ways of walking around this, right? And trying to figure out how to engage. And this is where we're called to dive in and start engaging and continue to advocate for our officials to be better. So whether that means that we're writing or calling or hitting the streets or getting engaged in other ways, thinking about how are we standing up for the people who are being harmed, right? And how are we putting ourselves in those spaces? Because then my voice now becomes a part of the community that should be driving the idea of subsidiarity, because I'm a part of naming what the issues are locally. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that does help. And the on the positive side of that, so can you name some practical ways that we can get out there to defend human life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've got a whole plethora, and thinking particularly in the pandemic, I don't know if this is what the question was talking about right now while we're trying to still protect ourselves in many ways. Um, Writing letters, getting involved. There is a huge new opportunity to access our legislators, even if we're not in Washington, D.C. So, for instance, last week I partook in a interfaith effort to advocate for immigrants and refugees. And I could call from Seattle to speak directly to my congressman's office about this issue, which I normally would have to fly all the way across the country to get involved in. But we have new access to get into these spaces and to have these conversations. So there's new opportunities that are coming out with this as well. Then there also are other ways to show up. I think that there's advocating by speaking out to our church, thinking about what tables of power you sit at and how those tables of power can be shifted based on where you sit, whose voices are not present at those places, and how do you invite those thoughts into it. So whether it's a table of power at your church, if you're on a committee or you're involved in young adult ministry or otherwise, or if you're at a place of power at your work, or even just by being an employee, or any volunteer organization, thinking about how am I using the strength of the group that I'm with to move forward with that and to help engage that way.
That's great. And I was just thinking, I remember a quote from that I read once, that subsidiary really is doing things at the lowest level possible, but the highest level necessary, right? So when it comes to certain things, right, it's not that everything gets shoved down, but you do things at the highest level necessary given whatever the problem is.
I love that.
Someone's asking, how do you address, or we address, but I'm going to turn it to you. How do you address single issue voters, right? When you've come across single issue voters, what do you do?
Yeah. So I invite them. I think that there is this element of questioning that is super important, by asking questions about what is driving people, and what is at the core of their belief of engaging with that issue. What is the key thing and the key value that they're holding in having that be your single issue, and then asking other questions and being informed to say, what other questions, what other areas might this value also be being played out in our politics? And is this possible to maybe expand our view a little bit to look at this idea of the common good and the broader sense of looking at all of these and thinking about how we're called to expand our view a little bit more.
Okay. So following up on that, right, there's a lot of people who get scared about discerning or getting into conversation because of encouragement from church leaders that they look up to, or their friends and family. What do you do in those situations?
Like your church leaders are encouraging you to be part of a conversation, or?
No, or that people are encouraging you maybe not to engage in more than just one issue.
Yeah. So I think that this is where, again, it's the idea of saying, you know, what wisdom does your life have to bring? What wisdom do my life have to bring? I think that young adults, in my life experience, I've been taught to think about complexity of issues. And I think that that's been a pretty common thing that I've experienced in working with a lot of young adults. And I think it's a gift that we have to bring uniquely to this situation. That we're able to say there is a complexity to this issue. And so, can we look at the world from saying, you know what, it's actually very intersectional. There's a lot of crossover of all of these issues. And so, how are we looking at the fact that, you know, people are suffering from this, but also having this other issue? There's a great program in Washington State that's called the Prepares Program. It's working to end abortion and working to end the need for abortion. So Catholic Community Services, which is our, what's it called in other states? I'm forgetting.
Catholic Charities.
Thank you. Yes, Catholic Charities. And the bishops also gathered together to think, how can we work to end this? And so they saw that the majority of people that have an abortion have it because they don't feel that they have the financial or community support to raise a child. And so this program provides wraparound services for the mother and the family from birth or from pregnancy until the child is age 5, or as long as the person needs it within that window. And there was a woman that was really engaged in advocating against abortion. She would have considered herself a single issue voter. And she signed up for the Prepares program to accompany a woman who was pregnant. And as she accompanied her throughout this time after the baby was born, she found out that the woman was leaving her child at home with her slightly older sibling, so the other child, in the evening to go and work a job. And she was wondering why, and was pretty upset that this was happening and complaining about it. And through diving in a little bit deeper, she found that the woman needed to work under the table. She wasn't documented. And so she wasn't able to get a job in some of the other ways. And through that, now that woman is one of the biggest advocates of immigration reform in Washington State right now. And so thinking about how we get involved and how we say, if we're single issue voters, how do we get to know the people who are really impacted by that issue and walk alongside them and see what are the issues impacting them and work in the holistic way.
That's great. Here's a resource question that maybe Marianol has an answer to. Do you have, or can you point us in the direction of resources in Spanish for Latinos and Hispanics on faithful citizenship? The person pointed out that the USCCB video is in English only at this time on the website. So.
All right, well, I'll put in a pitch for that to get translated into Spanish. Speak truth to power. And then I also will say, I think we have a team that I work with who's called the Discípulos Misioneros Marianol, and we are working with all of our resources in Spanish and working with the Latino Hispanic population in the church to help engage around that. So head to our Marianol website, marianol.us, and we have these young adult communities. We're offering them in English and Spanish, so we'll be walking with people around these areas as well.
Great. We have a follow-up question from last week as well, and it's around racism and how do you suggest we address racism when we see it in our church culture, right? That address racism as though it's not something external to us, but is among our fellow human beings and fellow Catholics?
What a wonderful question. These are the questions we should absolutely be asking right now. First of all, I will name that I am a white woman, and so the first thing that I would suggest is look to the Black leaders that are lifting up fantastic resources around this. The call from last week, I think Timon's will be great. I also think looking at where we can fall in line with what people are advocating for. For instance, in Seattle, one of the parishes that's traditionally a Black parish is taking some good action. So I'm trying to figure out ways that I can listen to what they're advocating for. The deacon there just released a document about what he hopes that the Archdiocese does and what each parish would do. And so thinking, how do I work together with this deacon and also like maybe approach my parish with this module, because he knows that she's and his community much more than I do. So I would say lifting that up and, being prepared to step into it, lean into it, be a little uncomfortable, and just hold that sense of, we're standing in the place that we're called to be because racism impacts all of us. That as long as one of us is not being able to live out their full rights and responsibilities and not being honored for their dignity of life, then none of us are. So how am I making sure that that's being carried out as well?
In your work as a young adult minister, that's your full-time job, right? So how do you get young adults to know and to think that their vote is important and impactful?
Yeah. So I know because I've worked in politics before. I've spent doing the very typical political science thing of spending a summer or two interning in Washington, D.C. And I know that calls and actions into legislation really make a difference. And then also the fact that voting really does make a difference. And yes, you might live in a state where you feel like your vote won't matter based on either direction that the state will go. But again, just to name that what really drives so much of our policy is local politics. It absolutely is continually impactful of the situations that we find ourselves in. I think you can see it in what's being carried out in our streets right now with Black Lives Matter. You see that cities across the country are responding so differently to what's happening. And that's based on who we've put into those offices of power and those political offices of power. And so your vote is hugely important for that. And it's just Google close elections and you'll find a ton in your state, I'm sure, that are decided by a couple hundred votes. Because people don't vote in local elections. And so when we do, our voice really, really matters.
Do you have any suggestions for how parishes can discuss political issues, in the parish community? And just as an example, climate change.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, a parish legally can't come down on one side or the other in terms of an elected official, but we do have things to stand behind in terms of the issues and the areas that we are voting on. So climate change, as I said, our current pope and our pope before him have both been outspoken advocates of the environment and taking care of creation. So if we look at climate change as an impacted issue, I think that we can speak to these different tenets of Catholic social teaching that we talked about before. I'm thinking about how this all impacted. One of the ways that I look at it, and I work for Mary Knoll, so we work around the world, and I see consistently that the people that we work with and the stories that I'm hearing from our priest brothers, sisters, lay people around the world is that the biggest impact that they're dealing with are the impacts of climate change. And so what I try and do is I bring those stories to my parish. I bring those stories to my young adult group to say that this is something we care about. Particularly in terms of the parish, I think as young adults, we have a unique voice that we can use for a powerful role because there's a lot of people in parishes that wonder, where have all the young adults gone? And it's like, I'm right here. Um, and to say, like, I am a young adult, I show up for Mass, I'm engaged, I'm a registered parishioner, and I really care about this, and what can we do about it? And more often than not, I find that parishes are like, yeah, let's do something about it. I don't have time to do it, but if you want to start something, like, I'll work with you on it. So I think that's another big part of it as well. Getting a group of other people to work on it with you.
Great, thanks. I'm just going to give a shout out to Paul's chats here. So go check the chat bar. Thank you, Paul, for noting that most of the resources are in English and Spanish, and we'll work on making sure everything is subtitled in the future. But so thank you for that, and all that's going on in the chat bar. It's busy over there. I'm trying to keep up. One more question for you, or a next question for you, not the last one. What are the small steps, Anna, that you would tell people who are just starting to get involved on how to get started in this realm?
Yeah. I think I love that you're asking this question because it's what we've got to do, right? All of us started with small steps. The first phone call that I made to my legislator's office, I was sweating and like terrified. I remember I was like a freshman in high school and I was sitting in my high school hallway like calling, and I was so scared. And I reached an aide that like later on in life I was like one of those legislative staffers, right? And I like reached one of them and I was like, hi, I really want to advocate for this, right? And I was terrified, but it was fine. Like nobody died. It worked out great. Like, I'm sure they were like, well, that was cute. But it's like, yeah, we should all start small. So I think depending on what issue you're currently thinking about, see if there's some of your friends are currently concerned about that too. And maybe you've got some friends who you've seen on Facebook that are politically active. If you have friends that are posting about some of this stuff, reach out to them, because I know I love it when any of my friends are like, hey, Anna, I really want to get involved in this, but I don't know how to start. I'm like, yes, let's work together. This is so great. So get a companion. Jesus sent us out in pairs, right? So get somebody to go with, and start small. Yeah, just take one little action. Maybe you see that it's making a phone call. Maybe you see that it's um, writing a letter or signing a petition. Maybe then eventually it might lead to joining a neighborhood group or joining a local concern about that. The barriers to entry on those things are really low right now because they're all Zoom calls. So you can jump onto those and not say anything, and nobody will like notice that you're there, but you can kind of see how it goes. You don't even need to like change out of your pajama bottoms. It's great. So I would say definitely like jump in, like get somebody that you know of who's also engaged, ask them how to start, find out what's going on in your community. And Facebook's really good for that, Facebook neighborhood groups and things like that. And, always bring it back to prayer too, because Jesus is walking with you as you do it. So do that and know that there's a lot of us who are praying for and with you. There's a ton of us who are praying that more young adults do get involved in this political advocacy work, because it's so important. And so you've got a prayer force out there too.
Right. So we asked Rosalind this last week, because I'm going to ask you, how do you personally balance prayer and action?
Yeah. One of the ways that has been taught to me that I've been so grateful for has been like whenever I feel a strong emotion rising in me, it's like check in with God. So if I get pissed, I'm like, all right, God, here I come. Like, I'm mad. What's going on? If I'm like really, really excited about something, then I like also want to check in with God about that. And so always trying to make sure that I don't rush. And I think this is one of the areas of learning for me too that I'm trying to look is like that gospel story that I shared about. Jesus bent down and wrote in the sand, and he like took a moment, right? He also went up to the mountain to pray. He also like took a couple moments to step back and say, all right, what am I called to do next whenever I'm unsure? And so thinking of that and thinking of saying, how do I respond when I have strong emotions. How do I make sure that I've got little reminders to do stuff? How am I making sure that I am starting my day in prayer, and maybe I get around to it again at the end of the night, and like, or whatever, but maybe I'm like more consistent throughout. But putting little reminders in like that are really helpful.
Well, I'm going to throw this back to Lauren to close us out now that we're getting next to our hour mark here. But thank you so much for answering all of those questions, Anna.
Great questions. I am honored that they were all there. Thanks for asking.
Anna, thank you so much. It was such a gift to hear you share tonight. The chat bar has never been busier. Thank you so much for that, and everyone who shared resources. Thank you. We will be back here next week, same time, same place, with Darius Villalobos, who is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the National Federation of Catholic Youth Ministry, and then again for the following week. Be on the lookout for the recordings, which will be sent out via email. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Nick Stein. We're happy to answer any questions between now and next week or get you any resources that you might need. So thank you all so much for being here. It's a gift to spend Wednesday nights with you all.